Hi everybody, Adrian Plus here.
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
And we've reached number 31.
We have.
Thank you to the person who said, I appreciated number 30. It's not often people actually say the number of them, so thank you for that.
It's funny, isn't it? Because when we started this new year, it felt so dead, as though there was no new news and that it wasn't a new year at all. And then in the last 24 hours, I suppose it's only about that. It's like like they say about buses, that none are coming and then they all come along at once, and it's felt like that, hasn't it? A huge amount of news all tumbling over.
It's amazing. It's like some giant soap, isn't it, with all this stuff happening.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked before about how the buildings of our life, the secure places, seem to be crumbling in some ways. Churches and work and holidays and normality.
Yeah.
And when things fall apart, as they sometimes look as if they are, there's almost a sense of being mocked by reality. Well, that all the things we have held dear and that have supported us are a bit silly, or they don't really work. And I think we've got to be very wary of that, because I don't believe that. We'll say a bit more about that later. But and we saw it literally in Washington, didn't we? This week. I mean, extraordinary film at the Capitol.
Well, last night, and the fact that we talk about secure edifices, and people would have said that building was impregnable, and yet, because it's the very centre of democracy as far as America is concerned, and to some extent as far as the world is concerned, I think, Capitol Hill. And there it was, windows being broken and the building being stormed. And almost like the opposite but the same, because in the UK, and I know some people listen to us who are not in the UK, but I think most people know about the NHS, the National Health Service that we've got, and to hear the words, it's in danger of being overwhelmed, I think is the most, I don't know, it really shocks me deep down, because the NHS has always been there for us, hasn't it, in our generation.
I think it is frightening for people. I mean, the night before last, the stuff on Capitol Hill, it threatens your safety somewhere inside yourself, doesn't it, to see that happening. I mean, someone once said to me, civilization is just an agreement that we'll all pretend we're not uncivilized. And I think that fear lives in people to an extent. But yes, it's been overwhelming this week. And
then, of course, in the UK, we've had these terrible numbers. I mean,
numbers
yesterday of people dying
positive,
and people tested positive. And yesterday in the UK, we hit this horrible mark of 1,000 people dying. And that's 1,000 families devastated. And it's actually probably 1,000 or more nurses, doctors coping yet again with somebody dying that they were caring for.
Yeah.
And then in the middle of all that number, we had an email, didn't we?
Yeah, we had an email from a friend in America who we've actually never met, but his partner very sadly died in hospital. And so there's just that one capsule of absolute suffering going on there. And it's an example of many, 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 many homes where somebody is weeping because they've lost somebody they love. It's very hard.
And you go from this big news, devastating things, to what's happening to you. And I had the most ridiculous experience just last week, didn't I? I had my plaster off. Big news in the Plass household. For those of you who haven't been following this at all, I broke my ankle quite badly, or very badly, and 6 weeks ago, put in plaster. Plaster came off last week. Big deal. But you know what was so stupid is that sitting in hospital having my plaster taken off, I felt acutely embarrassed. And the reason for that was because on my left foot, the one that didn't have the plaster on, was a face. And the face was the face of Virginia Woolf peering at me from out of my shoe.
Now, we ought at this point to help people to understand that we haven't gone raving mad. Far from being people who wear socks that represent our favourite people, our oldest son, gave us all a book for Christmas. And with the book came a pair of socks. And
what are you wearing on your feet, Adrian?
The socks that go with the book have pictures of the person who wrote the book. So I, extraordinarily, have George Orwell on both of my feet. And if I wrinkle my feet, he can frown, he can look puzzled. Yes. You can even laugh a little. So that's the reason.
Our feet could have their own little puppet show going on, couldn't they? But I think what really hit me was that in the middle of all this, and a great tension in the hospital, where I had the plaster off, because clearly things aren't going well there for them, is me being embarrassed about a sock. And it just...
What was your fear? What did you think they were going to think?
Well, I don't know.
Do you think they thought you were going to eject a stream of consciousness at them when they didn't expect it?
I really don't know.
And you don't hold any you don't sort of support the thesis of what it is to be Virginia Woolf.
No, not at all.
Never mind.
Well, I mean, the other thing, of course, this week in the UK is we're facing full lockdown. Slightly different in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England, but essentially a full lockdown.
Yeah.
And we've heard from some of you. Yeah. And we know that a lot of you just about coped with the first lockdown. But there's a sense of pretty desperate feeling. Some people are quite angry. Some people are disappointed. And a lot of people are very confused. I mean, the whole business of the schools suddenly closing and that energy has gone. You know, the energy to try again. The kids are at home again. The idea of making biscuits again, of doing jigsaws again, of watching too much TV. And somebody said, I have to say, this is the worst I've ever felt about it all. I'm just so tired and a bit lonely.
I think that probably sums it up for a lot of people.
She said, right now, the future just looks monotonous and bleak.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
And she's not alone in that. I know. Well, she is alone. That's the whole point. To say she's not alone in that. Yes, she is alone in that, but she's not the only one feeling like that.
A thought occurred to me this week because I had to, as you know, get on the phone to the insurance company about our boiler.
If you remember, we told you that one of the joys of Christmas for us was that our boiler exploded just before Christmas.
Yes. Bridget was sitting with her broken ankle
in my
when the
wheelchair.
boiler exploded. And as we know the Bible well, and James in particular, we rejoiced
I think we said
over these things, and they were pure joy. Anyway, I had to keep ringing them about things connected with this, the insurance company, and as many firms do nowadays, they put some music on for the long periods during which I was waiting for someone to speak to me. And that might have been all right if the music had been okay, but the music, I think Bridget said it sounded like the music you would play if you had one of those black and white dismal films of refugees marching hungrily through deserts because they're being taken to their death or something. And when you're waiting to speak to someone, it has that kind of effect on you.
And every now and then they say, what is it they say? They interrupt it and you think, this is it. We're going to speak to someone.
We value you and we value your call.
Yes.
Please hold until one of our operators is, well, it just goes on forever, doesn't it? And after a bit, what happens? Well, you decide, or no, I can only say what I decide, that the music, or the muzak, if it's what it is worse than the silence. And
it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, obviously the music is because if it's silence, you might just wander off and think, oh, blow this for a game of soldiers, or whatever the expression is that you might use.
Yeah.
But the aim is to keep us hanging on. The aim is to sort of lure us into thinking that any minute now...
Yeah, keep us in. And I think that the reason it struck me was because it is or could be a kind of metaphor for what goes wrong with our attitude to faith at times like this. That filling the silence with poor music is not a very good idea.
Now, you're not actually talking about music.
No,
itself,
I'm not talking about Christian music, although that might be part of it.
That's not what
I'm
we're
talking about music, about stuff that you wouldn't actually listen to, but it persuades you that it's worth hanging on, because eventually something will happen. And there's a little verse in Malachi, book of Malachi, last book of the Old Testament, which talks about false fire being brought to the altar.
Oh, right.
And it's very destructive to have things that actually don't mean anything keeping you going, because within the silence, well, there may be more in that than we had understood.
But there is a fear, isn't there, that if people aren't hearing something, then they might drift away.
Yeah.
I mean, they might not be hearing from God. They might not be feeling connected with people in the church. And the danger is that they'll drift away. I'm trying to think. I mean, I suppose one example could be when Moses went up the mountain. Because, I mean, he was up there for some time, wasn't he? And he had a job to do. He was an important part of the process. It's interesting how Aaron got drawn in to the whole business of the golden calf making and all the rest of it. But that was kind of...
Well, for those who don't know this story, and most of you will, I expect, there was a clamour for something to happen, and Aaron gathered together all the gold stuff and made this golden calf, and they worshipped, or apparently appeared to worship this golden calf. And I think this is the problem, that where a gap comes, where people feel God is not there, or he's not being what he should be, or it's not happening in the way that you remember. And like we've said before so many times, the scaffolding is down and you're faced with who you are. The sight of a golden calf is quite welcome, with someone saying, here you are, I've sorted it, here's something to really remind you of what God is. And in fact, of course, the golden calf, when Moses came down, he was furious, wasn't he, about that? It really was. And it opens up the question, do we need to look at the value of a silence? And I think ages ago we mentioned C.S. Lewis thinking about the absence of God as much as the presence of God, and waiting to see what he does in that time.
Well, we're on hold again, aren't we? I mean, in a way, that's what being locked down is. We're kind of on hold. We know the vaccine is coming, and all over the world, I know people are becoming impatient for it. We've only just heard about it. I mean, we've only just got the Oxford vaccine through. I think it was beginning to be rolled out on Monday. Now it's Thursday in the UK. We're already beginning to feel, well, where is it? We do become very quickly impatient. We're not good at being on hold, but we are on hold. I mean, in the UK, we're on hold for goodness knows how long. Hopefully only till March. We don't know. As we say, our schools are closed. Kids are back at home. And even though it's a new year, I don't really feel like that beginning of something new, does it? I mean, we haven't got... I mean, all our work, all the things that we thought we'd be involved in this year are as cancelled
Most of it is cancelled, yeah.
So far.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously our hope is in this vaccine, and yet there's been some quite interesting responses to it, really, haven't there?
Yes, I find it all a little bit confusing. Apart from anything else, we hadn't heard of vaccines until a very short time ago.
What, vaccine for this?
Yes,
no.
And now we all talk about, the Oxford vaccine and the this vaccine and the that vaccine. The incredible adventure that's happened, but with those people who've developed these vaccines, one day we'll know what that really meant. But in the meantime, what has surprised me is how many people are very, very nervous or not exactly cynical, but very doubtful about whether we should go down that road. And there are one or two conspiracy theories around.
And that does apply to some Christians, doesn't it? And I mean, we've been pondering that a bit, really.
Well, I don't quite understand the psychology of it. There is in certain quarters, there seems to be a view that it should be God sorting this out and not the vaccines. Now, to anyone who's listening and who thinks that sounds a little bit insane, I don't understand it either. I mean, personally, if someone came to the door, knocked on the door and said, "Here's a vaccine," I would take it like a shot.
Yeah.
Because I want
well,
to
it is a shot in your arm.
Yes.
So you would take it like a shot.
Take it like a shot in my arm. Yes, I would.
But I think we've
it's
got
odd.
this.
And so anyone who understands why that is, I would love to hear whether you work to the centre of that or not.
Well, certainly there has been increasingly a sense that science is versus God. That God is God and science is science. And yet, actually, I know, and I'm not a scientist. I'm the least scientist person I know.
I didn't know you weren't a scientist.
But I do know that, I mean, for example, Einstein, I mean, he said, the more I study science, the more I believe in God. And because I was thinking about that, Adrian, I thought, well, I don't really know when science began, something you'd call science. And I gather that it really started ages ago, end of the medieval period. And the early scientists... You're so helpful to me. Just because I'm trying to... The early scientists believed that God had made the universe.
Yeah.
He was a rational God who'd made a rational universe, and it was their job. And this is where I'm quoting something, because this is Johannes Kepler. He said, I probably pronounced that wrong. He said, as priests of the highest God, our job is to try and catalogue what laws of the universe he had created. So there was, in the beginning of the exploration of science, no problem with the idea that God was the mastermind behind the universe, who had created the laws, the reason the Earth spins on its axis.
A common belief, wasn't it?
So, but science was to actually try and explore it.
Yeah.
And we had an email, didn't we, from somebody who sent us some stuff from... I think
something
it's
to add to the argument,
CNI,
wasn't it?
I think. And their Creation Ministries International, but they were making a very strong point that they're pro-life, they're various things, but they're not anti-science.
No, they said, in fact, they said that the production of antibodies is part of the system designed by God that actually helps our bodies to remember how to fight off infections. Vaccines try to train our immune system by giving it what they call target practice.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to have to get on with the lockdown and wait.
Yes.
And get our vaccines.
What was that expression that you used? I know you've said it in one of these, but it was about stretching monotony. Who was it who said that?
It was Chesterton, of course, who said it.
Of course.
And he said, well, if you stretch monotony far enough, it will break with a sound like a song. And I found it quite inspiring to remember that again. In fact, you were quoting an Isaiah verse, weren't you?
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking, what can we do to hear this sound of the song facing monotony? And yes, this quote from Isaiah 43. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I'm making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. And I think what I was thinking was that this feeling of it being a wasteland, of it having no beginning, no end, no real purpose. You know, we are in a very strange situation that some people, the nurses, the carers, the people in care homes, the people in the supermarkets, they're working their socks off. And we are asked to do nothing.
Well,
so
it's very hard work doing nothing. That's the problem. But I think this is right. We've got to be. I remember C.S. Lewis writing, I can't remember the exact quote, I'm sorry, but he more or less said things like philosophy and love and poetry are not necessary to survival, but they are what makes survival worthwhile.
Yeah.
And for me, I mean, probably no one will ever want to hear it, but I'm going to go back to my guitar.
Good.
And I'm going to really learn my finger picking, which I did learn the form of it, but I need to really work on it.
Good.
And I'm going to have a go at that. And
I'm so glad. I mean, I remember when I very first knew you, Adrian, you were learning the guitar for the first time. Do you remember? And you were playing Hey Mr. Tambourine Man, and there was a change of chord between tambourine and man.
Yes.
So every time I could hear you singing, you were singing, well, I'm not going to sing it, but Hey Mr. Tambourine, long pause man. But no, this
so
will be...
we'll have our go. We'll have a go at these things. Seriously, we've got to be a little more proactive.
And look for new things. You know, we said we had a puppy and we had snow here. And watching our puppy in the snow, seeing it, smelling it, feeling it, thinking it. Snow, something we so easily take for granted. So yes, look for the new. Look for the new.
Yeah, but we'll have a go. We'll have a go. Just as long as what we do is not a new Monet jigsaw, because
well, that will
those who remember our stuff we did ages ago will know that it nearly killed us during that Monet jigsaw. Yeah. But you have started a new jigsaw, haven't you?
Well, I have. It looks very nice, and it's got lots of cats.
Anyway, if you've got any ideas for filling time, what we can do, how we can work this somehow, I mean, it's not going to be easy. Let's not kid ourselves.
No.
But tell us what you think. We'd love to know.
Hang on in there. And we'll talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.